Audible Archives presents Shadows Over Coleson Manor, written by Raul. I'm your host and narrator, Rob. Trust is the only currency that, once you lose, you can't earn. The narrow lanes leading to Coleson Manor were slick with rain, reflecting the last embers of a fading sunset. Drake Vane adjusted the lapel of his dark wool overcoat, the brass watch on his wrist catching the muted light. Ashford had taught him to read the city's whispers, but the countryside brought its own subtler signals. The shift of wind over hedgerows, the groan of ancient gates, the faint smell of damp stone and timber. He arrived at the manor's main entrance, a sprawling structure that seemed to crouch in the mist like a wary beast. Ivy clung to its walls, windows were tall and dark, and the towers rose unevenly, giving the building an unsettling asymmetry. The Coleson estate was notorious in Ashford for both its wealth and its eccentricities, a family that indulged in peculiar habits, unusual collections, and, as Drake suspected, hidden tensions. A tall figure in the doorway, the caretaker, nodded curtly. "Detective Vane, we've been expecting you." "The incident? Well, it's taken everyone by surprise." Drake's steel-gray eyes scanned the gates, the paths, the subtle signs of recent activity. "Show me to the scene," he said evenly, "and let me meet the family. Every detail matters." Inside, the manor smelled of polished wood, old books, and a faint trace of burnt wax. The sitting room was large, adorned with dark oak paneling and portraits of Colesons who had long since passed. A fire smoldered in the hearth, casting long, wavering shadows that flickered across the walls. Mrs. Helen Coleson, matriarch of the estate, stood stiffly by the window, hands clasped tightly. Her expression was carefully composed, but the slight tremor in her fingers betrayed unease. Beside her, young Edward Coleson shifted nervously, glancing at the door as if expecting something, or someone, to emerge from the shadows. Drake's gaze swept over them, taking note of their posture, their gestures, the unspoken tension radiating from the room. "Tell me what happened," he said, voice calm but commanding. Helen exhaled slowly. "It was Henry, my brother. Found him this morning at the base of the East Tower. No one saw anything." "It seems impossible. How could he?" Her voice trailed off, uncertainty painting her words. Drake crouched slightly, inspecting the floor near the window. No scuff marks, no overturned furniture. Just the faintest trace of damp footprints leading toward the garden, almost as if someone had paused before vanishing into the mist. His notebook was already in hand, ready to record every nuance. "Was anyone else in the house last night?" Drake asked, eyes sharp. Edward spoke up, voice hesitant. "Only the household, maids, the caretaker, and a few distant relatives visiting for the weekend. But we all were in bed when it happened, I swear." Drake noted the tight circle of suspects, the isolation of the estate, and the opportunity inherent in such a confined space. "Very well. I'll need to see the tower, every access point, and anyone who might have had reason to be near Henry." As they ascended the grand staircase, Drake's mind catalogued the manor's peculiarities. The uneven stair treads, the creaking boards, the sharp angles of the galleries, all details that could reveal hidden passages or the subtle movements of someone familiar with the estate. Outside, the fog thickened around Coleson Manor, swallowing its towers and turrets, giving the illusion that the building itself was suspended between reality and shadow. Drake's eyes caught the faintest movement near a garden hedge. Perhaps a trick of light, perhaps someone observing him. Either way, he made a mental note. Obsession often hides in small details, Drake murmured under his breath. And a fall, even one that seems accidental, can carry the imprint of intent. Ashford or countryside, the principle is the same. Observe, deduce, anticipate. The shadows of Coleson Manor seemed to respond to his presence, stretching along the walls, curling into corners, and whispering of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Drake Vane had arrived, and the estate would reveal its truths, not by chance, but by the relentless attention of a man who noticed everything. The East Tower loomed above Drake as he ascended the narrow spiral staircase, each step groaning underfoot, the sound swallowed by the manor's cavernous halls. He moved deliberately, noting the uneven stone, the faint scuff marks, and the occasional chip in the banister, small signs, easily overlooked, but telling to someone trained to observe. At the top, the room was unexpectedly spacious, lined with tall windows that framed the misty grounds below. The floorboards were worn in a pattern that suggested regular use, but there were anomalies. Faint scratches near the window latch, a small smear of soil on the sill, and, most telling, a narrow groove along the floor where something heavy had been dragged. Drake crouched to examine it. "Someone moved deliberately here," he murmured. "Not an accident. Footprints alone can't account for this. Something, or someone, was shifted carefully." Helen Coulson's voice echoed from the doorway. "Detective, you really think that Henry's death wasn't just a tragic accident?" Her hands were pressed tightly together, the knuckles white. Drake looked up, steel-gray eyes steady. "Tragic accidents leave randomness. This," he gestured to the scratches and marks, "was planned, or at least, the environment was manipulated to make it appear natural. We need to know why and by whom." Edward, standing awkwardly to the side, added, "But who could have done this?" The house was full of family and staff. Everyone was accounted for. Drake rose, pacing slowly near the window. Even in a fully occupied house, opportunity exists. People overlook the smallest things when trust or routine blinds them. Someone here noticed the patterns of Henry's movements and acted. He moved to the desk against the wall, sifting through papers left in disarray. Most were mundane ledgers and letters, but one envelope caught his eye. It was unsealed, bearing no return address, and contained a small sketch of the manor with the east tower circled in fine, precise lines. On the back, a note in spidery handwriting. "Precision reveals the fault line." Helen gasped. "I don't understand. Henry never mentioned anyone sending this." Drake examined it closely, noting the ink, the style, and the deliberate vagueness. "This is a warning, or a taunt. Someone knew the tower intimately, knew Henry's habits, and wanted him, or someone else, to notice. Whoever sent this is more than a casual observer. They are methodical, familiar with the estate, and daring." Edward frowned, his voice shaky. "Do you mean one of us sent it? Or someone else entirely?" Drake's gaze swept the room. "Possibly someone within, possibly someone with access but unseen. That's what we need to determine. And the timing, the handwriting, the emphasis on precision, all tell a story. Someone obsessed with control, with patterns, perhaps even with Henry himself." He moved toward the window, peering out at the sprawling gardens and fog-wrapped hedges. Coulson Manor is full of shadows, inside and out. Each corridor, each staircase, each tower could conceal intent. But every detail, every trace left behind, has meaning. And I intend to find it. Helen took a hesitant step forward. "Detective, what should we do? Stay in our rooms? Lock doors?" Drake shook his head. "No. Panic creates more mistakes than it prevents. Observation, patience, and careful movement. That is how we uncover truth. Do nothing that hides evidence, do nothing that disrupts patterns. The culprit is counting on haste and distraction. We must not oblige them." He straightened, eyes scanning the room one last time. "The tower is our first clue, but not the only one. Every resident, every visitor, and every employee may hold a piece of the puzzle. We start here, and we trace outward, carefully, deliberately. Only then will the shadows yield their secrets." Outside, the fog thickened, curling around the manor like a living thing. Drake's gaze followed it, sharp and calculating. The game had begun, and Coulson Manor would reveal its truth, not by chance, but under the relentless scrutiny of Drake Vane. Drake Vane descended the east tower slowly, his footsteps deliberate, absorbing the faint creaks and echoes that might otherwise escape notice. The manor felt alive in a way only old estates could be. Every corridor, every hallway, whispered of history, authority, and unspoken rivalries. He had learned early in Ashford that the smallest gestures could betray intentions, and here, among the Coulsons, every subtle movement counted. In the drawing room, the family and key household staff had gathered. Helen Coulson's posture was rigid, her eyes shadowed by worry, while Edward remained silent, fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve. Two of the household maids, pale and nervous, hovered near the doorway, and the caretaker, a tall man with lined features, leaned against the wall, observing silently. Drake's gaze swept the room methodically. "Thank you all for waiting. I need to ask questions. I will begin simply. Who was in this room last evening, and when did you leave?" Helen spoke first, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I retired early. The household was quiet. Edward and I were in our respective rooms by 9. The maids completed their rounds and retired shortly after. Henry, I believe he went to the tower after dinner, as was his habit." Drake's eyes narrowed slightly. "Alone?" Edward hesitated, then shook his head. "No. Uncle Henry sometimes met with Mr. Winslow, the family solicitor. They discussed the will and property matters. But last night, I believe he went up alone." Drake took a slow step toward the caretaker. "And you, Mr. Carrington? Did you notice anyone entering the tower late in the evening?" Carrington's expression remained impassive, but Drake noted the faint tightening of his jaw. "No, detective. I made my rounds, ensured all locks were secure. Nothing out of the ordinary." Drake's gaze lingered on him, noting the small details, the dust disturbed at the bottom of the staircase, faint scuff marks, and a small oil stain near the windowsill. "And yet," Drake said quietly, "the East Tower contains evidence of movement. Someone unfamiliar with ordinary pathways would have left more visible traces. But these are subtle, calculated." Helen exhaled. "Detective, are you suggesting someone inside the house did this deliberately?" Drake's eyes were steady. "I am suggesting nothing is accidental until proven otherwise. But I am observing, and the signs point toward knowledge of Henry's routines and the manor's layout." The maids exchanged nervous glances. Drake moved closer, crouching slightly to note their reactions. But Mary, the younger of the two, fidgeted with her apron, eyes darting to the floor. I only did my rounds, sir," she stammered. "I understand," Drake said, voice calm. "But even those doing simple tasks can inadvertently become part of a larger plan. Tell me everything you noticed, anything unusual, any deliveries, any visitors." Mary hesitated, then whispered, "There was a man, a stranger. He came yesterday, asked for Mr. Henry. I didn't see much, just a glimpse. He had a long coat and a hat, but he seemed precise. He measured things, even asked questions about the East Tower." Drake's steel-gray eyes flicked to Carrington and Edward. "A visitor? Someone observant, controlling, familiar with measurement or detail. That explains the notes, the sketch, the precise disturbances in the tower. He first knew Henry's habits." Helen's lips pressed together. "But who? Why?" Drake rose slowly, walking toward the window that overlooked the misty gardens. "Control, influence, greed, or even obsession, sometimes all at once. The clue lies in the subtlety, in the intent behind each act. Our mysterious visitor wants more than presence. They want command." He turned, gaze sweeping the family and staff. "Every person here has routines, habits, and knowledge. But only one, or a very few, could exploit them without leaving overt evidence. And I intend to find who it is, step by step." The fog outside thickened, curling around the manor like a living, breathing entity. Drake Vane's eyes followed its movement, noting each shifting shadow, each subtle shift of light. Coleson Manor was filled with secrets, and he would uncover them all, not by force, but by observation, patience, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Drake Vane spent the remainder of the afternoon walking the manor from top to bottom, cataloging details that most would dismiss. The library smelled of dust and leather. The drawing room carried the faint scent of wax polish. The corridors whispered with every footfall. Nothing escaped his notice: the tilt of a picture frame, the subtle indentations on the carpet, the faint scratches along the windowsill in the East Tower. He returned to the tower once more, kneeling beside the floorboards where the groove had suggested something heavy was dragged. Running his fingers along the groove, he noticed a small metallic object partially hidden in the dust. It was a miniature brass caliper, engraved with the initials GF. Drake's eyes narrowed. Precision, obsession, and a signature, he murmured. Someone is leaving their mark, not just in presence, but in measurement. Helen Coulson's voice startled him from the doorway. "Detective, what is it?" "Another clue." Drake held up the caliper carefully. "This may tell us more than words. It's deliberate, yet personal, someone who wants recognition or control over what they measure." Edward, peering over his shoulder, frowned. "GF? That doesn't match anyone I know in the household." Drake shook his head slightly. "No, but it may match someone who has access or influence over the estate. I suspect a visitor, or perhaps a distant relative, someone who understands Henry's routines and the manor's layout intimately." Carrington, standing near the window, added cautiously, "Detective, could it be a family friend? Someone trusted?" Drake pocketed the caliper and straightened. Trust is irrelevant when obsession is involved. People reveal themselves in patterns, in precision, in the subtle ways they interact with their surroundings. Whoever left this wants to be noticed, but also thinks they remain unseen. He stepped toward the window, eyes scanning the mist-laden gardens below. The fog curled around the manor like a living thing, hiding pathways and obscure corners. Somewhere in that haze, a figure might be observing, measuring, and calculating. Drake's gaze fell back on the tower itself. The scratches, the groove, the caliper, all pointed to methodical intent. "This isn't a simple accident," he muttered. "Henry's death, the notes, the sketch, everything was planned. And whoever orchestrated it will strike again if left unchecked." He returned to the library, gathering the guest records, delivery logs, and staff schedules. Each entry, each name, was a potential lead. He cross-referenced arrivals with known habits, looking for anomalies, discrepancies, or subtle patterns. Hours passed, the manor silent except for the occasional creak of settling wood and the distant sound of a clock marking time. Drake's mind worked methodically, connecting clues, mapping movements, and predicting potential motives. The caliper, the sketch, the focus on the east tower. They formed a web, and Drake intended to trace every thread. Helen watched him, uncertainty etched on her face. "Detective, do you think we'll know who did this soon?" Drake looked up, steel-gray eyes meeting hers. "We will, Mrs. Coulson. The signs are faint, but they exist. Obsession always leaves traces, and in a house as precise as this, nothing truly escapes notice." As evening fell and the fog thickened, Drake Vane stood in the tower, caliper in hand, thinking of Henry Coulson and the obsessive mind that had disrupted a family. The game had begun, and every detail, the smallest measurement, the faintest trace, would guide him to the truth hidden within Coulson Manor. The next morning, the manor was quiet, almost deceptively so. Drake Vane moved through the grand hallways with deliberate patience, notebook in hand. Every step, every glance, every pause was measured, not just for observation, but for the reactions of those around him. Ashford had taught him that human behavior rarely lies. It only masks itself behind gestures, words, and half-truths. The first person he approached was Edward Coulson, pacing nervously in the conservatory. "Edward," Drake said, voice calm, "I need a full account of last night. Not just where you were, but what you thought, what you feared, and any interactions you may have had with others." Edward swallowed hard, his fidgeting hands betraying tension. I went to my room after dinner. I heard nothing unusual. I tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about Uncle Henry. And then there were noises, maybe the wind? I can't be certain, but I saw something unusual outside my window, a shadow moving quickly. I thought it was just my imagination." Drake nodded, scribbling notes in the oilskin-bound notebook. Shadow, movement, timing. Every observation matters. "Did you recognize the figure?" Edward shook his head. "No, just a long coat, hat low. But it moved with purpose, calculated steps, not random. Whoever it was, they knew the grounds." Next, Drake spoke with Helen Coulson, who appeared in the drawing room, anxious yet composed. "Mrs. Coulson," he began, "family dynamics often reveal motives. Any disagreements, tensions, or inheritances that could cause extreme reactions. Helen hesitated, wringing her hands. Henry was particular about his estate. He wanted control, not just of finances, but of how the family presented itself. There were deep disagreements with cousins over minor inheritances, and he kept strict rules over the manor's management. But I never thought it would escalate to this. Drake's eyes flicked to the corners of the room, cataloging the furniture, the paintings, the subtle wear patterns in the carpet. Minor disagreements can escalate when obsessions are involved. It's not the size of the conflict, but the intensity of fixation that matters. And someone here was fixated. Carrington, observing silently, finally spoke. "Detective, I've been thinking. There was an envelope found near the tower, a sketch of the East Wing, with some notations. I assumed it was a prank or harmless curiosity, but maybe it was more." Drake's eyes sharpened. This precision, measurement, observation. The caliper, the sketch, the footprints, all point to someone who thrives on detail. Obsession is rarely hidden. It reveals itself in patterns, in tiny compulsions, in repetitions. We follow those patterns, and the truth emerges. Drake moved toward the window, peering out at the mist-shrouded gardens. He noted the symmetry of the hedges, the alignment of the pathways, and the subtle marks in the soil, evidence of someone moving deliberately through the estate. The visitor is not random. They are methodical. They know the house, the family, and the routines. And that knowledge will be their undoing if we continue to observe carefully. Helen's voice broke the silence. "Detective, how can you be so certain it was someone from outside? Could it be one of us?" Drake turned, steel-gray eyes meeting hers. "It could be either. But obsession leaves traces. Every habitual movement, every minute irregularity, every hidden signature, it speaks. And soon we will read it clearly." He returned to his notebook, tracing lines, connecting observations, and marking anomalies. The manor was a living puzzle, and the pieces were slowly revealing the hand that had orchestrated Henry Colson's demise. Somewhere among the family and staff, a mind of precision and obsession awaited exposure. As the fog deepened outside and the manor's walls absorbed the silence of the morning, Drake Vane stood, resolute. Patterns never lie. Shadows never hide forever. And Ashford had trained him to see what others overlook. Drake Vane moved through the manor with quiet precision, his mind cataloging every detail. The layout of Coleson Manor, with its uneven towers and secretive wings, offered ample opportunities for a careful observer, or an intruder familiar with the estate, to navigate unnoticed. His steel-gray eyes flicked to shadows that stretched oddly along the walls, corners where dust had been recently disturbed, and the faintest lines in the floorboards suggesting something, or someone, had been dragged or shifted. Carrington accompanied him, cautious but attentive. "Detective, are you sure there's more to find? The estate is large, but surely Henry's fall was just an accident." Drake's gaze swept the grand hallway. Accidents leave chaos. This leaves a pattern, and patterns are deliberate. He knelt by a section of the wooden floor near the east tower. A faint indentation caught his attention, subtle but unlike the surrounding wear. "See here, someone has lifted and replaced a floorboard. Not for repair, but to hide movement. Hidden passageways often reveal the intent of someone accustomed to the manor's layout." Carrington's eyes widened. "A passage? How did we not notice?" Drake smiled faintly, lifting the edge of the floorboard. Dust motes danced in the light from his torch. Hidden, yet telling. Whoever placed this intended secrecy, but also left traces for those observant enough to see. And we are observing. He descended into the narrow passageway, air damp and earthy. The walls were lined with old stone, uneven and cold. He noticed faint chalk marks, tiny, almost imperceptible. They suggested direction, perhaps a breadcrumb trail left by someone familiar with the manor's secrets. At the passage's end, Drake discovered a small chamber, roughly concealed behind a false wall. It contained stacks of papers, architectural sketches of the manor, and an assortment of measurement tools, calipers, rulers, and a tape measure worn at the edges. Most notable, a journal lay open on the desk. Drake carefully flipped the pages. The handwriting was meticulous, precise, and obsessive, cataloging every movement in the manor, every minor dispute, and every routine the family followed. References to Henry appeared repeatedly, noting timing, habits, and vulnerabilities. He leaned back, steel-gray eyes cold. Our visitor is not random. They are methodical, calculating, and intimate with the Coulsons' lives. This is not just interest, it is fixation. Control masked as observation. Carrington swallowed hard. Detective, are you saying someone has been spying, planning this for a long time? Drake nodded. Yes. And now we have the evidence. Hidden passages, detailed logs, and tools, each a signature of someone who believes precision gives them authority. Whoever orchestrated Henry's fall is likely still in the house, observing the aftermath, testing reactions. He replaced the floorboard carefully, leaving the chamber undisturbed for the moment. We proceed with caution. We question everyone again, cross-reference movements with what we know now, and watch for patterns. Obsession rarely hides, it only delays exposure. And I intend to uncover it. Carrington glanced around nervously. Do you think they'll try again? Drake's eyes swept the manor, noting the slightest shift in shadows. Possibly. But every move they make leaves a trail. And trails can be followed. In Ashford or here in the countryside, I've learned that the smallest details carry the greatest truths. As he emerged from the passageway and returned to the upper floors, the fog outside had thickened, curling around the manor like a living veil. Drake Vane moved through Coulson Manor, resolute, aware that the obsessive mind who had orchestrated death was close at hand, and that every hidden path, every subtle sign, would eventually lead him to the culprit. The dining room of Coulson Manor was cold and silent, the morning sun struggling through heavy curtains to illuminate the long oak table. Drake Vane stood at its head, notebook in hand, as the family and key staff gathered, faces tight with tension. Ashford had taught him that pressure reveals cracks in composure, and here, in the manor, he intended to press gently, but deliberately. Everyone present, Drake began, voice calm, has knowledge of the household's routines, of Henry Coulson's habits, and of each other's movements. I will ask questions, and I expect full honesty. Any omission, no matter how minor, could alter my understanding. Helen Coulson's hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together. Detective, what are you looking for exactly? Drake's steel-gray eyes scanned the room. Patterns. Inconsistencies. Small details that betray motive, opportunity, and intent. Obsession always leaves traces, and in a house as precise as this, traces are everywhere. He turned first to Edward. Edward, tell me about your relationship with Henry. Were there disagreements, financial or otherwise? Anything that might foster resentment? Edward swallowed hard, glancing at the table. We disagreed, yes, over the will, over property management. But I would never harm him. I respected my uncle. Drake noted the hesitation, the slight twitch of Edward's hand. Resentment can be subtle, Edward. Even small slights can fester, especially if someone is meticulous and perceptive. Were there other family members with access who might feel differently? Helen exhaled slowly. There is my cousin, Marjorie. She has always envied Henry's influence over the estate. She is ambitious, perhaps overly so. But I never imagined she would. Drake made a note. Ambition is a common motive. Envy can sharpen it. Marjorie will need to be questioned carefully, he said. Carrington, the caretaker, spoke next. Detective, there is also the solicitor, Mr. Winslow. He has been managing the estate's affairs for years. Close to Henry, yes, but precise and exacting. If someone wanted to manipulate events, they might do so through him or exploit his routines. Drake nodded thoughtfully. Precision, access, influence. That fits the pattern we've observed. Measurements, hidden passages, detailed logs. The person orchestrating this likely believes their intellect surpasses suspicion. He then addressed the staff. And you, maids, cooks, and others, have you noticed anyone unusual, any visitors, or anything out of place over the past weeks? Mary, The younger maid swallowed nervously. Yesterday, a man came to the manor. He asked for Mr. Henry, but he seemed more interested in the rooms, the towers, measuring things, taking notes. I thought it was harmless, but... Drake's eyes narrowed. You saw him. Can you describe him? Mary shook her head. Coat, hat, precise movements? I didn't see much more. Drake made a note. A visitor, observing, calculating, leaving traces without revealing identity. The pattern was forming, and it spoke of someone obsessed with control and detail. He closed his notebook gently. Thank you. I now have a clearer picture of who had motive, access, and opportunity. But I will continue observing, cross-referencing movements, and reviewing each interaction. Obsession leaves fingerprints, subtle, but undeniable. The family exchanged uneasy glances. Drake's calm, unyielding presence made the manor feel smaller, each movement scrutinized, each gesture revealing. The fog outside wrapped the estate in uncertainty, but inside, patterns were beginning to emerge. Drake stepped toward the window, gaze sweeping the misty gardens. Somewhere among the family, the staff, or the occasional visitor, a mind of precision and obsession awaited exposure. And he would follow every thread until the truth was revealed. Drake Vane returned to the East Tower as dusk settled over Coleson Manor, the fog thick outside, curling around the turrets like ghostly fingers. The manor seemed quieter now, but he knew silence was never empty. It held intentions, movements, and sometimes threats waiting to reveal themselves. He carefully examined the journal and caliper he had found in the hidden chamber, cross-referencing notes with the household schedules and the visitor sightings. Every line, every measurement, every observation recorded meticulously by someone with obsessive precision told a story. Control, Drake murmured, tracing a finger along the edge of the journal. Observation. Timing. They've studied Henry, the house, the routines, and possibly us. Carrington, standing near the doorway, broke the silence. Detective, I've been thinking. The markings on the floor, the caliper, the journal, they all suggest someone who measures every step. But they also suggest familiarity, someone who knows which traces to leave and which to obscure. Drake nodded. Exactly. This isn't a visitor stumbling into the manor for the first time. This is someone with intimate knowledge, perhaps a relative, perhaps someone long embedded in the household. But obsession leaves patterns, and patterns do not lie. He spread the manor plans across a table, marking windows, staircases, and hidden corridors. The caliper's measurements matched not just room dimensions, but the subtle alignments in the manor's architecture, the angles that allowed discrete observation, access, and, if necessary, manipulation. There, Drake said, pointing to a faint chalk mark near the servants' corridor. See this? A breadcrumb left intentionally, not for Henry, but for anyone observant. Whoever did this wants recognition, or at least wants to challenge someone who can read the patterns. And now they've revealed themselves to me. Carrington leaned in. Who is it, detective? Drake's gaze swept the manor, lingering on the portraits of past Coulsons, the careful arrangement of furniture, and the subtle asymmetry in the tower stairs. The person obsessed with precision, with control. They are someone overlooked, someone underestimated. And they have calculated every possibility, every reaction. But there is one detail they misjudged, their inability to remain invisible to me. He rose, eyes sharp. Tonight we watch. We observe. And when they make their next move, we will confront them with what the patterns have already told us. Their fixation, their meticulous planning, their hubris, it will be their undoing. Outside, the fog thickened, a living shroud over the gardens, the terraces, and the hidden corridors. Drake's mind mapped every potential route, every hiding place, every angle from which the obsessive visitor could move. The house, for all its secrets, had one weakness: the observant eye of a man trained to see what others missed. As night fell, Drake Vane stationed himself near the tower's entrance, caliper in coat pocket, notebook ready, eyes alert. Somewhere in the manor, someone precise, controlled, and calculating was waiting, perhaps for the next opportunity, perhaps to strike again. But Drake was ready. Patterns never lie. Shadows never hide forever, and in the intricate web of Coleson Manor, every thread would lead to the truth. The manor lay in tense silence, the fog outside thick as wool, muffling sound and shadow alike. Drake Vane moved through the corridors with practiced calm, his footsteps absorbed by the aged stone and polished wood. Every creak, every breath of wind, every flicker of candlelight was a clue, if observed correctly. He paused near the east tower, listening. The faintest shuffle of movement reached his ears, almost imperceptible, but enough to make his hand brush the revolver in its holster. Drake had learned in Ashford that the smallest noises often carried the greatest intent. From the shadows, a figure emerged, slim, careful, deliberate. A long coat, hat pulled low, gloved hands. The obsessive visitor he had been tracking for days now stood before him, calm, almost smug. "You've been watching," the figure said, voice precise, controlled. "I wondered how long it would take before someone noticed the patterns." Drake's steel-gray eyes met theirs. "Long enough to understand your methods. Short enough to stop you before your obsession claims another life." The figure laughed softly, a measured sound. "Oh, detective, obsession is not so easily curtailed. The guides, it informs, it protects. Henry was a necessary detail. But the manor, the family, the patterns, they all belong to those who recognize them." Drake advanced slowly, hands visible but ready. "Observation is one thing. Murder is another. You crossed the line, and the traces you left, your caliper, your journal, the hidden passage, they betray more than skill. They betray compulsion. And compulsion can be intercepted." The figure tilted their head, almost admiringly. "Intercepted? Yes, perhaps. But are you certain you understand the full pattern? The web I have woven? You see fragments, detective, but the whole." They gestured at the manor, every corridor, every shadow. "The whole is precision incarnate." Drake's gaze flicked to the floor, noting the faint chalk marks and displaced dust that mirrored the obsessive figure's every movement. "And the flaw is always there. Every obsessive pattern, no matter how intricate, leaves a weakness. You underestimated one constant: human attention." A tense silence filled the corridor. The figure's eyes narrowed, gloved fingers twitching near their coat. "You think you can stop me?" "I know I can," Drake replied steadily. "Because I've read the traces. I've followed the patterns. And I've anticipated your moves." Suddenly, the figure lunged toward the stairwell, attempting to escape through the servants' corridors. Drake reacted instantly, revolver drawn, firing a warning shot that rang sharply against stone. The figure froze, glancing back, calculating, then slowly raised their hands. "You are always one step ahead," the figure admitted, voice low. "I did not expect such precision." Drake advanced cautiously, noting the slight tremor in the gloved hands, the tension in the shoulders, the subtle signs of fatigue. "Obsession drives mistakes. And now yours are visible." With a final, measured movement, Drake secured the figure, cuffing their hands and retrieving the journal and caliper. The obsessive visitor, clever, meticulous, and dangerous, was finally contained. Helen and Edward, drawn by the commotion, arrived moments later, witnessing the subdued figure. Helen gasped, recognition and disbelief mingling in her expression. It was Marjorie?" Drake nodded, eyes still alert. Her obsession with control, her fixation on the manor, her detailed observations, it drove her to orchestrate Henry's death, believing she could manipulate events without consequence. But patterns, no matter how intricate, always leave a trail. Edward shook his head, stunned. "I never imagined she could." Drake's gaze softened slightly, though his voice remained steady. "People underestimate the subtlety of obsession. Precision can blind judgment. But here, in the careful observation of details, the truth always emerges." Outside, the fog swirled around Coleson Manor, dissipating slightly as dawn approached. Inside, the tension began to ease, though the shadows of obsession and the consequences of ambition would linger in the family's memory for years to come. Drake Vane pocketed the caliper, securing the journal, and took a deep breath. Another pattern unraveled, Another truth revealed, and another house restored, at least temporarily, to order. Morning light filtered weakly through the tall windows of Coleson Manor, illuminating a house that felt both relieved and haunted. Drake Vane walked slowly through the drawing room, observing the family as they tried to adjust to the revelation of Marjorie's obsession and her culpability. Helen Coulson sat stiffly in her chair, hands clasped tightly, staring at the fireplace. I never realized how deep her fixation went," she murmured. "It seemed like ambition, but this?" Drake nodded, leaning against a polished column. "Obsession rarely announces itself. It grows quietly, subtly, and then manifests in precise, often destructive ways. Marjorie left traces. Every caliper mark, every sketch, every hidden passage indicated not just planning, but a desire for control." Edward shifted uneasily in his chair. "I keep thinking, the journal, the passages, she was inside the house all along. How could we have missed it?" Drake's steel-gray eyes softened briefly. "You didn't miss it. Obsessive behavior is clever, patient. People notice what they expect to see, not what's hidden in plain sight. Marjorie knew that, and relied on it." Carrington, still standing near the doorway, cleared his throat. "Detective, what now? Will the manor ever feel normal again?" Drake considered the question carefully. "Normal is relative. The house, the family, and the staff now know the dangers of unchecked obsession and precision. Awareness is the first step toward safety, and the law ensures accountability for actions." He moved to the east tower once more, glancing at the floorboards, the faint grooves, and the windowsill. Each detail had told a story, and each story had led to truth. Patterns, even when hidden, always speak. Observing them allows us to prevent further tragedy. Helen rose, voice tentative. "Detective, you've saved more than just the house. You've saved us from ourselves in a way." "Thank you." Drake nodded, modestly but firmly. "I only follow the evidence, Mrs. Coulson. The rest comes from observation, patience, and a willingness to see what others overlook." As he prepared to leave, he took one last look at the manor. Shadows lingered in corners, and the fog still curled around the grounds, but the obsessive influence had been halted. Coulson Manor, for now, was safe. Stepping into the morning light, Drake Vane felt the familiar pull of the world beyond the estate. Another pattern unraveled, another truth revealed. Ashford had trained him well, and wherever precision and obsession threatened, he would follow the traces, relentless, patient, unyielding. With one last glance back at the manor, he turned toward the road, the fog receding as if acknowledging the end of a quiet, deadly game. Back in his modest flat above the tea shop in Ashford Court, Drake Vane settled into his worn leather chair, the soft clatter of the tram lines below serving as a steady rhythm to his thoughts. The Coulson case weighed heavily, not just in its danger but in the subtle psychology that had guided every action, every choice. He spread out his notes on the small oak table, sketches, caliper measurements, timelines, and observations of every individual involved. Each page told a story, each detail connected to the next. His steel-gray eyes moved methodically across the paper, ensuring that every clue, every subtle trace, was accounted for in his report. Obsessive behavior, he murmured to himself, when combined with familiarity and ambition, creates a pattern nearly invisible to those who are not looking. Yet even the most meticulous pattern leaves a flaw, something overlooked, something assumed safe. He paused, thinking of Marjorie Coulson, her obsession with precision and control, and how it had led her to orchestrate Henry's death. Control masked as care, precision as obsession. That's the mark of someone who believes intellect absolves morality. Drake picked up his fountain pen, dipping it carefully into ink, and began writing. He catalogued the sequence of events, the hidden passages, the caliper and sketches, and the psychological motives uncovered through patient observation. Every detail mattered, not just for legal purposes, but for understanding the human mind at its most dangerous. As he wrote, memories of Ashford came to him. The dockyards, the faint glow of the furnace quarter at night, the lessons learned in military service, and the patient observation of human behavior. It all converged here, in this report, in this moment of clarity. The tea shop below hissed softly as morning patrons arrived, oblivious to the web of intrigue that had unfolded in the countryside manor. Drake sipped his tea, considering the duality of human nature, the capacity for both subtle cruelty and remarkable loyalty. He finally set the pen down, satisfied that the report captured the truth as meticulously as he had observed it. Coleson Manor had been a case of hidden obsession, intricate planning, and subtle psychology, but the threads had been traced, the pattern revealed, and the threat neutralized. Drake leaned back, eyes narrowing in thought. Every case left a residue, a reflection of human complexity, and this one was no different. The patterns he followed, the truths he uncovered, they were all part of a larger map of behavior, and in that map he was both observer and protector. As the morning sunlight grew stronger, Drake Vane prepared to leave his flat, knowing the world still held shadows, patterns, and obsessions waiting to be uncovered. Ashford called him, as it always did, and he would answer, not with impulse, but with precision, patience, and unwavering attention to the truth. The sun hung low over Ashford as Drake Vane made his way back from Coleson Manor, the city's tramlines clanging softly beneath his boots. The countryside had faded behind him, leaving only memories of fogged gardens, hidden passages, and the meticulous obsession that had nearly claimed a life. Drake's mind wandered over the events of the case, each moment etched with precision: the caliper, the journal, the hidden corridors, and Marjorie's calculated movements. But beyond the mechanics of crime, the human element remained vivid: the envy, the ambition, the compulsion to control. He paused near his flat, looking over the streets of Ashford. The city was alive, a mix of coal smoke, tram bells, and distant voices, a different kind of puzzle, one that required constant observation. Here, patterns shifted rapidly, and yet, the principles remained: attention to detail, patience, and the willingness to follow what others overlooked. Inside his flat, Drake spread the Coleson notes one final time. He reviewed the family dynamics, the staff statements, and the hidden passages. Everything fit into a cohesive pattern, a map of obsession and precision. And yet, even with the case officially closed, he felt the lingering weight of human complexity pressing against the edges of understanding. He poured himself a small measure of coal-aged whiskey, savoring the faint warmth as it settled. A cigarette followed, slow and deliberate, smoke curling into the dim room. Every case, he murmured to himself, leaves a mark, not just on the people involved, but on the mind of the observer. Patterns reveal truth, but they also reveal human nature, messy, meticulous, and often merciless. Drake carefully stored the caliper and journal, locking them away. The objects, like the lessons they carried, were safe, but the knowledge remained active in his mind. Coleson Manor had been a study in precision and obsession, a reminder that human behavior could be measured and traced if one watched closely enough. As night fell over Ashford, Drake Vane stood at the window of his flat, steel-gray eyes catching the glow of the city's lamps. Somewhere in the streets, in the alleys, or along the tram lines, other patterns waited to be observed. Other obsessions would surface, other truths would need uncovering. And he would be there, patient, precise, and unrelenting. The Coleson affair was over, the obsessive mind exposed, and justice delivered. But for Drake, the case was more than that. It was a reminder of why he had returned to Ashford, why he pursued the truth, and why the smallest details, when observed with care, could unravel even the most dangerous of designs. With a final glance at the city, Drake turned, notebook in hand, ready for whatever pattern awaited him next. Ashford had called him back for a reason, and he was listening.
You've just heard Shadows Over Coleson Manor, a Drake Vane mystery, written and narrated for Audible Archives. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more stories.